everyone, it's Fiona and welcome back to my channel, Croeso I fy channel. I hope you're all very well. Today I want to talk about the books that I read in January, and it was a pretty mixed bag, both in terms of the actual books I read, the genres, the content, but also my opinions of them. So I actually ranged from a 1.75 star rating all the way up to a 5-star rating over 4 books, with an average of 3.63. So let's talk about them. The first book I read this month was the 5-star read, which means the first book I read in the whole of 2026 was a 5-star book, which is just a great sentence. And the book was Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. And as it says, it is first-person stories from the 21st century. So it's a collection of pieces of writing, essays, I think there was a eulogy in there, TED Talks and speeches, articles, loads of different kind of formats of disabled people's first-person experiences of being disabled. Being disabled in an abled world. Yeah. So the book is not actually written by Alice Wong, but it's compiled by Alice Wong, and I think she did have one story of her own as well. I think some of them were obviously, like the recorded ones are pre-existing works out in the world, but I do think some of them were kind of commissioned for this book by Alice Wong, which is really cool. And this was just such an insightful and eye-opening read. I think this is a really accessible point into understanding disability and disabled people's experiences, maybe for the first time if that's not something you're really familiar with. I don't like to say I thought this was really interesting, because I feel like that kind of objectifies the people who are talking about their really personal stories, but I do just find it really interesting reading and learning about other people's lives. Other people as in other people than myself. So is interesting the right word? I don't know, but it was insightful. It was accessible in that I think anyone could read this and take something from it. I don't think you need to have any sort of understanding of medicine or of disabilities, because really, shouldn't we be looking at the person first? Okay, and if they're telling me I'm disabled and this is what that means for me, then that is all we need to know about that person and their disability. We don't need to know the ins and outs of how their medical situations, interventions, diagnoses work. We don't need to know that. We need to listen to the person as a person and hear about their world. I just thought this was a really great book, and I think everybody should read this. People often say you never know when you or someone you love is going to become disabled, and obviously that's true, but also I think even if that never impacts you directly, it's still so important and valuable to show empathy and compassion and just interest in disabled people or any other marginalised group. I just think it's really important, and I would really recommend this book. 5 stars, a good start to the year. Next I read Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This is a fiction book, so that first book was the only non-fiction I read this month. The rest are all fiction. This is a novel, it's a romance novel about a woman called Eve who gets pregnant from a one-night stand, and then she's kind of navigating that. She makes the decision to keep the baby, but there is positive discussion about her choice around that, which I really liked. And then a romance blossoms amongst this. This book, I liked it, okay. The plot was, it was a good plot. The love interest I liked, but there was just something missing from this book for me. I just felt really disconnected from the characters pretty much the whole way through. There were moments of vulnerability from Eve which I really liked, but they were few and far between, and most of the time I just felt so disconnected from her as a character. I wrote in my notes that I've just read back this morning, which I thought was kind of funny. I've put, Eve is trying a little bit too hard to be funny, with some success. So obviously there were moments where I did find her a little bit funny, but on the whole, it felt a little bit forced for me, the humour. it just didn't, the jokes didn't quite land for me, which is fine. And the writing was good, but a little bit too descriptive. Like, it was packed full of metaphors and similes, which I found a little bit overbearing. Like I felt it was a little bit too frequent. I think I just couldn't help but compare this to Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, which I just definitely preferred as a pregnancy romance book. That one to me just was so much better than this one. Not to say this one was bad, but it just wasn't special for me, like really nothing to write home about at all. And I gave it 3.25 stars. Buckle up. The Letters by Fiona Robin, now known as Satya Robin. This book is about 51-year-old Violet, who, in the wake of a divorce and her children becoming adults and moving away from home, she moves to a coastal village, kind of to re-find herself and figure out who she is without her husband, without being a mother to young children, and just kind of recenter herself and find out who Violet is. Lovely premise. The kind of mystery plot element of this book is that she starts receiving letters from a mother and baby home from the 1950s, and they're letters written from a young pregnant woman to her best friend. And we don't know why, we don't know who they are. Like, we've got their names, but their first names, that's it. We have no idea how it's anything to do with Violet, and nor does she. So she's confused, but she keeps getting these letters and she can't stop reading them. I don't know what to say. I found myself going to the acknowledgements of this book to see if the author had put, "Thank you so much to my editor." No, she hadn't. Do you know why? Because I believe this book did not have an editor. There were so many mistakes in here. So many mistakes. Things like the word do was often written with a 0 instead of an O. Characters' names misspelled several times throughout the book. Like, there's a character called Marjorie. Half the time she was spelled Marjorie with a Y at the end, half the time an IE at the end. No consistency. When she received the third letter, it said she received a third letter dated 3 days after the first letter. But you see the letters, we read the letters, and the first letter clearly says it was written on the 15th of September, then the third one says the 30th of September. Just inconsistencies throughout the book. That was so frustrating to read, and it was just not well written. Not well written, and if there was an editor, then she is right not to thank them in the acknowledgements, because they did a terrible job. It sounds harsh, but I touched on this in the reading vlog where I read this, and I just think it's unfair. Like, you're expecting people to pay their money to buy your book, then someone needs to have bothered to edit it. Like, you need to provide a good service. People are paying you their money to consume your content. Make it good content. And like, if I didn't like the storyline, which I didn't really, that's fine, because that's not anything wrong, that's just me, that's a personal thing, right? Same with me not liking the characters. Their main character was so judgmental, just really, not really a good person. But again, that's a me thing. But there being so many grammatic and editorial errors in a book, that is not a me thing, that is a problem. And I feel strongly about this. It really annoyed me. Interestingly, when I say the main character was so judgmental, you wouldn't think that the author is, by trade, a professional counsellor, psychotherapist, and Buddhist minister. You'd think that would be a pretty gentle person, understanding, and that's fine because she's not her character. But honestly, when I read up about the author after this, it felt like she'd put a lot of herself into a couple of these characters. But this character, main character, was just not a nice person, and she didn't have a redemption at the end where she like realised she'd been unkind and like made all her apologies. No, that was just who she was as a person. I felt there were some undertones of racism because the colour of someone's skin was only described when they were not white. Listen to this sentence. She managed to look authentically ethnic. I think that was supposed to be a compliment. It was as if the author was going, see, I'm diverse, but just not going about it in the right way. Then she makes a new friend who is a lesbian, which is a shocking new invention. She wasn't quite sure what to do with the knowledge that character was a lesbian. How about nothing? She'd known of lesbians, but she'd never had a lesbian in her immediate circle of friends before. She wasn't sure of the etiquette. And I could see where this plotline was going from a mile off, but her attitude towards her new queer friend was outdated and honestly just pathetic. It just wasn't a good time to read about. And that's all I'm going to say on this. I will be getting rid of it immediately. 1.75 stars. Then we had Redemption with Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I actually started reading this before I finished the letters because I'd got home, I was really tired from work and I just wanted to get into bed and binge read. And I knew I wasn't going to be doing that with the letters. So I picked up Scythe and I've been so excited about this book ever since I got it. Since before I got it, I knew I was going to really enjoy this book, or at least I anticipated that I would. So this is a YA dystopian about a world where all death has been cured, like nobody dies of natural causes anymore. So in order to curb overpopulation, there are scythes who are held in very high regard in society. They have to go through training and then they are appointed scythes if they're successful in their training. It's quite difficult because it's such an important job. So we are following Citra and Rowan, two teenagers who are invited to become apprentice scythes. And we watched that and it's a very interesting read. It's exciting, it's fast paced, and I really enjoyed it. From the get-go, the writing was so much better than the letters and I just felt excited from the very beginning. I will say I noticed a couple of mistakes in this one too. The first time one came up, I was like, oh, that's happening again, but I didn't mind because I was enjoying the book so much more. The second and I don't know if it happened 2 or 3 times, but I started to get a little bit frustrated by that then, because I still have the same feelings, like a book should be well edited before it's published, but it only happened a few times. This book was just so fun. Like the plot and the premise of the book itself is really fun, but also just the way it's written, I just really liked it. And I really liked the little subtleties of queer acceptance and anti-sexism. So for example, there's a point where Citra is going to this theatre, I think, and she's thinking about what to wear and she says, oh, I can wear this dress. She'd got it for prom last year, something like that, in the hope that Hunter, a boy in her class, would take her to the dance. Blah 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 blah, and then it goes on blah blah blah. But anyway, he'd ended up taking Zachary instead. And it was just like no conversation about it. It wasn't a thing at all, but it was just like, yeah, by the way, it's cool if you want to take another boy to the dance. I really liked that. And similarly, there would be like paragraphs about people. So for example, there was one about the peace protectors, which are kind of like bodyguards / police officers. Pretty stereotypically masculine role, okay? And it really made me notice my own bias, because I was reading it and I had assumed it was a man, and then it got to the end, it used no pronouns throughout this paragraph, and then at the end it said she, and I was like, ah, that is so smart. And that made me think, and I just really appreciated those little sprinklings of acceptance. I really liked it. So before each chapter we get a journal entry from a scythe. So one of the requirements of being a scythe is that they have to keep a journal, which is publicly available. And before each chapter we get to read one journal entry. And as we move through the book, we get opened up to more scythes' journals. So we see lots of different perspectives of life as a scythe. And I really enjoyed that. It was just so cool. This whole book was just so cool. I have ordered the second 2 books in the trilogy, The trilogy is called Arc of a Scythe. The next book is Thunderhead, I think, and then the final book is The Toll. I might have those the wrong way around. I went to Waterstones specifically to buy them because I have been trying to get most of my books secondhand lately or from the library, but I had a Waterstones gift card. So I was like, well, if I go and buy it on 2 books in this series that I know I'm going to enjoy, then that feels like a good way to use them. So I went to Waterstones. Did they have them? No, they didn't. They had about 5 copies of Scythe, but none of the other 2. I went to the counter and I said, just check in, like, if they were here, would they be out? And he said, probably, but let me have a look. No, we don't have them. I can order them in for you if you want. And I was like, no, don't worry about it, it's fine. I literally went and stood next to the copies of Scythe and found them on Vinted, and I found someone who was selling both the other 2 books. So I bundled them and they are arriving probably tomorrow, which is good news. But yeah, I'm very excited and hopefully I'll get to them pretty soon. Yeah, gave this one 4.5 stars. So those are the 4 books I read in January. Thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye!